Under the scorching midday sun of Los Angeles, amid blaring horns and hurried footsteps, a single moment seemed to still the city. On a searing metal bench lay a tiny German shepherd puppy, trembling, her weary eyes shining like a silent plea for help. Among the indifferent crowd, only one man paused. A man scarred by fire and loss, drawn toward that fragile gaze. What gave him the courage to step forward when others looked away, watched now to feel the power of compassion and the unspoken bond that can change everything. The afternoon sun pressed down on Los Angeles, heavy and relentless. Heat shimmered on the streets, rising from the pavement in waves. Cars crawled through traffic with horns blaring in bursts. Vendors shouted along sidewalks, buses stopped and started with their doors hissing open, and people moved quickly, heads down, eager to reach their destinations. It was a city used to noise, used to rush, used to turning its face forward and never sideways. Life here never slowed for long. Bruce stood at a corner, his shirt clinging to his back. At 55, the heat touched him harder than it once had, but he bore it quietly. His hair, once jet black, was threaded with silver now. His frame was broad, his steps steady though slower than the years before. He carried himself like a man who had lived through both fire and silence. For decades he had been a firefighter. The city had called his name when buildings collapsed, when flames turned nights into infernos. He had been the one to climb ladders into smoke and pull strangers from burning rooms. But memory does not let go easily. In his quieter years away from the sirens, he lived with moments he could not erase. Faces lost behind smoke, cries that fell silent before he could reach them. Those memories clung to him like shadows in daylight. They made his mornings heavy and his evenings restless. Since retiring, he had walked these streets, often searching for calm in the rhythm of the city, though it rarely granted him peace. Today was no different. The sky glared above him pale blue with no clouds to soften the sun. Around him people hurried in all directions. A woman in a suit spoke into her phone, weaving past with quick steps. Two teenagers darted across the crosswalk, laughing, their sneakers slapping against the concrete. A bus pulled up nearby, the door folding open as a group of passengers spilled out while others pressed inside. Bruce watched without much thought, hands in his pockets, shoulders heavy. He was used to being unseen, another figure among many. Yet beneath the noise and motion, he felt a restlessness in the air, the kind he had once known at fire scenes. An unease that made him look twice at the world around him. He did not know why, but something in him slowed his stride. His eyes swept across the bus stop, across the waiting crowd, pressed into the shade of the shelter. He almost kept walking. Almost. But his feet stalled as though caught by a thread he could not name. Bruce adjusted the brim of his cap and squinted toward the bench. The heat shimmered around the metal frame, sharp and blinding in the sunlight. People stood close, yet their bodies turned away, their gazes sliding off one spot as though it were an empty space. He noticed the quiet there, a strange pocket in the middle of noise. Something about it called him to look closer. The sound of the city dulled in his ears. Traffic moved, voices carried, but they faded into the background. Bruce narrowed his eyes, focusing on that patch of stillness on the bench, trying to make sense of why the crowd shifted its eyes away. And then, just faintly, he thought he saw movement. The sun struck the metal hard, and he raised a hand to shade his eyes. The shape came clearer, small and trembling, pressed against the hot steel. For a heartbeat, Bruce froze. His chest grew tight the way it once had when a fire revealed what was trapped inside. Something waited there at the edge of his sight. Something fragile. The shape came into focus. A tiny body, black and tan, pressed flat against the bench. Strips of tape wound tight around fragile paws, holding her in place, as though she were an object and not alive. The metal burned in the heat, and every quiver of her legs spoke of pain. Above her head, A torn scrap of paper fluttered in the breeze. The letters were scrawled in haste. Her name is Molly. She is soft. She is not mine. Bruce's breath caught. It was not the kind of sight a man expects at a bus stop. The crowd around him shifted with restless feet. Their voices clipped, their eyes moving everywhere but the bench. "Don't touch it," a man muttered, pulling at the cuff of his shirt as though the puppy's presence might stain him. "Animal control will deal with it," another said, already turning back to his phone. A woman in sunglasses tugged her bag closer to her side, careful not to let it brush against the small figure. A few teenagers raised their phones, tilting them for better angles. Their laughter was nervous, brittle, yet they filmed anyway, catching the misery as though it were entertainment. The puppy did not cry. She did not bark. Her ribs rose in shallow rhythm, her breaths too weak to fill the air. Her eyes lifted instead, wide and dark, fixed on faces that refused to meet them. When Bruce finally stepped closer, her gaze met his. It stopped him cold. Those eyes, wet, pleading, silent, held more force than any sound could. He had seen fire take walls, roofs, entire lives, but he had never seen silence cut this deep. The little German shepherd pup stared into him as though asking a question no one else dared answer. Does anyone still care? The street roared around them. Cars honked engines, sputtered voices, cursed into cell phones. Yet in the narrow space between man and pup, there was only stillness. A suited stranger barked at him. "Don't get close. What if it's sick? You'll get fined if you interfere." Another voice snapped from behind. The words pressed in like smoke, thick and choking. Each carried the same cold detachment that had left Molly bound to the bench. Excuses layered one on another. Rules, risks, penalties. While the pup's body trembled, her paws twitching against the tape. Bruce felt heat climb his neck. His fists curled at his sides, nails biting his palms. The tape cut into the dog's fur, pulling tufts that clung ragged against the steel. The sight made his chest ache, the kind of pain that reaches deeper than bone. Nearby, a mother turned her child's face away. "Sweetheart, don't look," she whispered, shielding his eyes. But the boy twisted in her grasp, peeking past her arm. His small voice carried soft but steady. "Mom, the doggie's crying." The words hung in the air, simple, undeniable. Heads turned, shoulders stiffened, but still no one stepped forward. The crowd shifted like water around a rock, restless yet unmoved. Phones kept recording. Feet shuffled back. Molly's ears twitched faintly at the boy's voice, a fragile spark that cut through the haze. Her eyes lifted again, locking once more with Bruce's. He felt the pull tighten. The same invisible thread that had made him pause at the corner now wrapped hard around his chest. It was not noise, not duty, not reason. It was the unspoken demand of a life still holding on. The murmurs of the crowd pressed closer. "Leave it. You'll regret this. She'll survive, that breed is tough." Their voices layered, sharp and insistent, warning him back. Bruce stood rooted, torn between their words and the weight of the gaze fixed on him. The sun bore down, the heat rising off the bench, the smell of metal sharp in his nose. Molly shivered, her body taut against the restraints. Yet her eyes stayed on him, steady, as if she knew he was her last chance. Bruce swallowed hard, his throat dry. His heart thudded heavy, like it did once before a fire demanded a choice. Bruce stood frozen, caught between the blur of voices and the silent pull of Molly's gaze. Every word from the crowd pressed against him. Warnings, judgments, excuses, they carried weight, the kind that told him to step back, to let the world handle what it had already turned away from. His mind understood the logic, but his chest burned with something stronger. The heat of the afternoon pressed down, thick and merciless. Sweat traced the lines of his face, stinging his eyes. His hands trembled at his sides, not from fear of the crowd, but from the memory that stirred within him. Years ago, he had stood in smoke sirens, wailing voices, shouting through radios. A building had collapsed too fast, flames cutting the air in sheets of red and black. He remembered running toward a voice, a woman crying out, but reaching only fire and falling beams. The silence that followed had lived inside him ever since a reminder of the lives he had failed to reach. Now at the bus stop, the silence was different, yet the same. The puppy's quiet breaths, her trembling body, her eyes fixed on him. It was a call just as urgent as any cry in the flames. If he turned away, he knew that silence would join the others, carving another scar into him. Bruce clenched his jaw. His heart hammered with the weight of decision. The crowd grew louder. "Step back, not your problem. Walk away." The voices echoed like water against stone, unyielding, relentless. Yet in that swell of noise, Bruce heard something else, his father's voice from long ago, steady and firm. "If a dog trusts you, you don't turn away. Ever." He had almost forgotten those words buried beneath years of fire and loss. But here they were, sharp and alive. Molly shifted slightly, her chest rising in a shallow breath. Her ears twitched, her eyes locked on him, patient and desperate. She was not pleading for the crowd. She was pleading for him. Bruce's fists unclenched. He felt his body lean forward almost without thought. The first step was small, but it was enough to set him apart from the circle of bystanders. Gasps rippled around him. Phones lifted higher, recording his choice. His mind whispered every warning he had heard. Rules, fines, risks, yet his heart answered with one truth. If he left her there, she would fade before help arrived. He knew it the same way he had once known when a wall would fall or a roof would cave. He had felt danger in the air before, and now he felt the thin thread of life slipping in front of him. Bruce wiped sweat from his brow and took another step forward. His boots scuffed against the pavement, heavy yet sure. He thought of the woman's voice he had lost in the fire years ago. He thought of how he had lived since carrying silence heavier than any flame. He would not carry another. His breath steadied. His chest ached, but it was no longer hesitation. It was resolve. The boy's small face flashed in his vision, eyes wide, waiting. Eliza's hand held the child back, but her gaze met Bruce's for the first time. She said nothing, but her silence was not the cold silence of the others. It held hope, faint but real. Bruce inhaled deeply, filling his lungs with the hot city air. He had made his choice. He stepped toward the bench. The moment Bruce stepped forward, the circle of bystanders tightened. Murmurs swelled into sharper tones. "Don't touch it," a man barked, his voice slicing through the air. "You'll get fined if you interfere." Another voice rose from behind. "Leave it alone. The shelter will come. It's not your problem." Their words snapped like whips, each one meant to halt him. The weight of their disapproval pressed against his shoulders. Phones hovered higher, catching every move. Some faces twisted with judgment, others with nervous amusement. Bruce did not stop. His steps were heavy but steady. Each one carried him closer to the trembling pup, strapped to the burning metal. "Crazy old man," someone muttered. "Back off," another shouted. The warnings tangled in the hot air, but Bruce's focus stayed fixed. The bench loomed in front of him now, the sun glaring against its steel frame. Molly's body quivered, bound tight by the strips of tape. Her eyes followed him, wide and steady, as though she knew this was her one chance. A horn blasted. The crowd jolted as a bus screeched into the stop brakes, screaming against asphalt. Tires smoked and the massive frame lunged forward before shuddering to a halt only feet away. The air filled with the acrid stench of rubber. People stumbled back in alarm. A woman yanked her stroller closer, shielding her child. Voices shouted curses mixing with gasps. Bruce did not move away. Instinct surged through him, the same instinct that had carried him through burning stairwells and collapsing roofs. His arms went around Molly's fragile frame, shielding her body with his own. The bus rocked its engine growling as the driver leaned on the horn again, furious at the chaos. For Bruce, the sound faded to nothing. All he felt was the trembling weight of the pup pressed against the steel and the pounding of his own heart as it threatened to burst. Molly flinched at the blast, her ribs jerking in shallow rhythm. Her head shifted weakly toward Bruce's chest as though searching for refuge. "Step back," someone yelled over the noise. "Get out of there," another voice echoed. But Bruce held still, bent over the tiny body, his frame shielding her from the crush of fear that rippled through the crowd. His breath came fast, chest heaving, but his arms were steady. For a split second, the world balanced on a knife's edge. Metal groaning voices panicked the air electric with danger. Bruce felt the weight of it, the nearness of disaster, the fragility of what he cradled. Then the bus hissed, settling fully into place. The immediate danger passed, but the echo of it stayed in every heartbeat. The crowd eased back, though their voices remained sharp. "You'll regret this," a man sneered. "She's not worth it," another muttered. Bruce ignored them. His hand brushed gently over Molly's fur where the tape bit into her skin. Her body twitched, ribs fluttering with effort. The warmth beneath his palm was faint, but real, fragile, yet alive. He bent closer, his voice low, steady despite the chaos around him. "I've got you," he whispered, though he knew the real work had yet to begin. The crowd continued to mutter, restless and divided. Some eyes held disapproval, others a flicker of uneasy respect. Eliza stood a few steps back, clutching her son. Her gaze locked on Bruce, her lips pressed tight, but in her eyes was something different from the rest. An unspoken trust. Bruce tightened his hold. He had faced firestorms, collapsing roofs, the relentless judgment of silence after loss. He could face this. The danger had brushed close enough to remind him how thin the line between survival and tragedy could be. And now, with Molly trembling beneath his hand, the choice was clear. He adjusted his grip, ready to peel back the first strip of tape. Bruce steadied his breath and lowered his hands to the first strip of tape. The sticky edge clung tight to Molly's fur, binding her paw flat against the burning steel. He slid his fingers under it, with care, his touch slow, deliberate, as though pulling at glass that could shatter with the slightest force. Molly flinched. A tremor ran through her small frame, her ribs jerking in shallow rhythm. The sound that left her throat was not a bark, not even a whimper, but a faint rasp, thin and broken. It struck Bruce harder than any shout. The tape peeled back in rough jerks, each tug pulling tufts of soft fur with it. Strands clung to the adhesive like reminders of what had already been taken from her. He paused, whispering low, "Easy, girl. Just a little more." His voice shook, though he willed it steady. The crowd shifted behind him, restless. Some muttered disapproval, others held their phones higher. To them it was spectacle. To him it was a battle fought inch by inch. The second strip came free. Molly's paw twitched weakly, freed from the scorching surface. Her toes curled stiff and slow, as though testing whether freedom was real. Bruce brushed his thumb across the pad of her paw, feeling how raw it had become from the heat. He moved to the next strip, this one wound around her chest, tight enough to press against her ribs. Her breath rattled beneath its shallow, every inhale a struggle. Bruce clenched his jaw and pulled carefully. The tape gave with a harsh rip, leaving a patch of fur, missing skin beneath reddened. Molly sagged forward slightly, her chest rising with a fraction more ease. Her eyes lifted again, glassy and heavy, but still fixed on him. One by one, the strips gave way. Each removal felt like tearing away pieces of her suffering. Each pause carried the weight of her trembling body against his hand. Sweat dripped down Bruce's temple, but he did not stop, not even when his fingers ached from prying at the adhesive. At last, the final length came loose. Molly slumped into him, no longer held upright by cruel restraint. Her body was feather-light, far too light for a puppy her age. She collapsed against his chest, limp as a rag, her breath shallow but real. Bruce caught her in both arms, cradling her close. The warmth of her body seeped into his shirt, faint and fragile. But it was there. Her head pressed into the crook of his arm, eyes slipping closed as if trusting him to carry what strength she could not. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some shook their heads, others looked away. But Bruce did not notice. For him, the world had narrowed to the small weight in his arms. He felt the fragile thrum of her heartbeat against his palm, fast, uneven, but fighting. He whispered again, softer now, "I've got you, Molly." Her name fell from his lips like a vow. Around him, the city noise swirled. Engines, horns, restless voices. But none of it reached him fully. All that mattered was the trembling pup pressed against him, freed at last from the cruel grip of the bench. Behind him, Eliza shifted, her son clinging to her side. The boy's eyes widened, his face bright with both fear and wonder. His small voice carried into the heat, trembling but eager. "She needs water," he said. Bruce turned slightly. Molly nestled in his arms. The boy's gaze held no judgment, no hesitation. Only simple truth. Eliza's hand tightened on her son's shoulder, but her own eyes softened as she watched the man and the pup. Bruce shifted Molly in his arms, holding her close, as though any distance might let her slip away. The pup's breaths brushed faint against his shirt, shallow but steady enough to remind him she was still here. The boy tugged at his mother's sleeve again, his eyes fixed on the puppy. "She needs water," he repeated, firmer this time, his voice carrying through the heat. Eliza hesitated. Her hand rested protectively on his shoulder. Her lips parted as if to hush him. But then she saw the way Molly sagged against Bruce's chest, saw the faint tremor of her paws, and her own resolve wavered. With a quiet sigh, she searched her bag, fingers brushing past scattered items until they closed on a half-full bottle. She unscrewed the cap quickly, her movements clumsy with urgency. She knelt and held it out, her eyes meeting Bruce's for the first time with clear intent. "Here," she said softly. "Try this." Bruce lowered himself slightly, angling Molly so her nose hovered near the rim. For a moment the pup remained still, her eyelids fluttering as though too tired to respond. The crowd murmured, impatient, doubtful. Phones tilted closer, hungry for an ending. Then Molly's tongue flicked weakly across the drop that touched her lips. The boy gasped in delight, clapping his hands together once. "She's drinking," his words burst out like a spark in the heavy air. Bruce felt relief wash through him, sharp and sudden. It was not much, only a faint movement, a single taste, but it was enough. He met Eliza's gaze over the pup's small frame. She nodded, her own eyes soft with something that looked like belief. For a brief moment, the noise of the city seemed far away. The boy leaned closer, his small hands gripping his knees, watching Molly as if his eyes alone could will her stronger. Bruce held the bottle steady while Eliza tilted it carefully, letting each drop fall slow and gentle. Molly stirred again, her paw twitching against Bruce's arm. Her breaths were still shallow, but the faint rhythm of life seemed steadier than before. "Good girl," Bruce whispered, his voice breaking against the weight in his chest. The boy looked up at him wide-eyed. "She likes you." Bruce did not answer, but his arms tightened slightly, holding the pup as if to shield her from every careless word that had circled them earlier. Eliza straightened, brushing hair back from her face. She still held her son close, but her voice was softer now. "She won't make it out here." We need to get her somewhere safe. Bruce studied her. She was not a stranger anymore. Her words carried the same urgency that beat in his chest. The boy pressed closer to his mother's side, nodding eagerly. "Take her," the child urged, his tone bright with faith. "We'll help." Bruce looked down at Molly, then back at the mother and son. In their faces he saw none of the cold detachment of the crowd. Instead, he saw the reflection of what he carried inside himself. A refusal to turn away. For the first time since the rescue began, the weight on his shoulders felt shared. The line between him and the strangers had shifted. They stood together now, bound by a small life that needed more than any one of them could give alone. The three of them held each other's gaze. It was a quiet bond formed not through words, but through choice. In that moment, they were not strangers at a bus stop. They were something closer, something like family, bound by circumstance. Bruce adjusted Molly in his arms, preparing to rise. The boy's eyes shone with anticipation. Eliza gave the faintest nod, steady and certain. Bruce rose slowly, his arms tight around Molly's limp frame. The pup's head rested against his chest, her breath faint but steady, her body trembling with each shallow inhale. He held her, as if the whole world might try to take her back if he loosened his grip. The crowd parted only slightly, their faces a mixture of curiosity and unease. Some leaned closer with their phones recording every second. Others shook their heads, muttering, as if his choice proved something foolish. "Let him carry the trouble," a man said with a snort. "Hope he knows what he's getting into," another muttered. The voices pressed against Bruce's back, but he kept walking. He had faced burning walls ready to collapse. This was only a sea of stairs. What mattered was the fragile life against his chest. The boy tugged at Eliza's hand, skipping to keep up. His eyes shone with excitement, but beneath it lingered worry. "She'll be okay now, right?" he asked. Eliza gave his hand a gentle squeeze. "We'll do everything we can," she answered, though her gaze stayed on Molly, concern etched across her face. Together they stepped clear of the bus shelter. The heat of the pavement pressed upward, but the farther they moved from the bench, the lighter the weight on Bruce's chest felt. He no longer heard the sharp words from behind, only the softer rhythm of the child's footsteps and the whisper of Molly's uneven breath. Cars passed in steady streams, their engines loud, yet none of it mattered. The three of them walked with quiet determination, bound by a purpose that set them apart from the indifference they had left behind. Eliza glanced at Bruce as they paused at the curb. "There's a shelter just a few blocks away," she said. "I can drive." Bruce nodded, grateful for her calm. He adjusted Molly carefully, mindful of her fragile frame. Her paws twitched once against his arm as if in restless dream, but her eyes stayed closed. The boy pointed down the street. "This way, Mom. Hurry!" His eagerness gave the moment energy, pushing them forward. When they reached Eliza's car, Bruce eased into the back seat, Molly still pressed to his chest. The boy scrambled into his booster seat, twisting to face them, his small hands gripping a juice box he forgot to open. Eliza settled behind the wheel, her knuckles tight around it, her breath steadying as she started the engine. The city rolled past in a blur of sidewalks, storefronts, and sunlit walls. To Bruce, the world outside was distant. His focus stayed on Molly's face. The twitch of her ears, the slow flutter of her lashes, the fragile rise and fall of her chest. Each sign was proof that she still fought. The boy leaned forward, his voice soft with wonder. "She's small," he whispered. Bruce gave a faint nod, his hand stroking gently over Molly's head. "Too small," he murmured. Yet even in her weakness, he felt strength in her. Eliza kept her eyes on the road. Her reflection in the rearview mirror showed a quiet resolve, a determination to get them there faster. The car filled with silence, heavy but steady, a silence that carried hope instead of despair. As they turned the final corner, the boy pointed ahead. A weathered building stood there. Its paint faded, but a sign above the door bore the name of the shelter. The sight of it stirred relief in Bruce's chest. It was not a promise, but it was a chance. And a chance was more than Molly had on the bench. Eliza pulled into the lot, the engine humming as it slowed. She looked back once her eyes meeting Bruce's. No words passed between them, but the message was clear. This was the moment that mattered. Bruce drew a deep breath, his arms firm around Molly, and prepared to carry her through the doors. Bruce pushed open the shelter doors, the weight of Molly pressed against his chest. A rush of sound met him at once. Barking echoed from rows of kennels, sharp and insistent. Phones rang at the front desk. Volunteers hurried down the hallway with leashes in hand, calling instructions over the noise. The air smelled of disinfectant, layered over the musk of animals, a blend of hope and hardship. Every corner of the place spoke of lives waiting for a chance. Some dogs pressed noses through the bars of their cages, tails wagging with a faith that tomorrow might bring better. Others lay silent in the shadows, eyes dulled by too many days without care. Bruce stood in the doorway, the noise swirling around him. For a heartbeat, he wondered if he had carried Molly far enough, if this place could really hold her fragile thread of life. Then Eliza's hand touched his arm, grounding him. A young volunteer at the desk looked up, her clipboard clutched against her chest. Her words froze as her eyes fell on Molly. "Oh, no," she whispered, rushing forward. "Bring her here, quick." Her urgency cut through the noise. Another staff member appeared from the back, his scrub streaked with fur and fatigue. His gaze sharpened when he saw the puppy in Bruce's arms. "Get her to exam, now." They moved quickly through a hallway lined with kennels. Dogs barked louder as Bruce passed, their voices rising in a chorus that filled the space. Some leapt against their cage doors, others whined low and steady, as though they knew the pup he carried was fighting for each breath. Bruce followed the volunteer into a small exam room. The fluorescent lights buzzed above, casting a harsh glow on the metal table waiting in the center. He laid Molly down gently on the towel the staff spread for her. The pup's legs folded awkwardly beneath her, her paws twitching faintly as though even lying there cost her strength. The staff worked fast. One checked her gums, pale and dry. Another pressed a stethoscope to her chest, frowning at the faint rhythm of her heart. Notes were scribbled, orders spoken in clipped tones. "She's dehydrated," one voice said. "Exhaustion." "Severe," another added. Bruce's hand lingered near Molly's paw, afraid to let go, afraid she might slip if he broke contact. Her chest rose and fell shallowly, each breath fragile but stubborn. The boy peered in from the doorway, clinging to Eliza's leg. His eyes were wide, his toy clutched tightly to his chest. "She's going to be okay," he asked, his voice small but carrying through the room. Eliza stroked his hair gently. "They're helping her," she murmured, though her eyes stayed fixed on the table, worry written plain across her face. One of the staff glanced at Bruce. "She's got fight in her," he said. "That's what's keeping her here." The word struck Bruce like a lifeline. He bent closer, his palm brushing over Molly's paw. Her fur was coarse where the tape had pulled, but beneath it, warmth lingered. Her eyelids fluttered faintly, a fragile tether that reminded him she was still present. Around him, the room buzzed with purposeful noise. Machines clicked on. A nurse prepared fluids. The vet entered, his expression calm but focused. Bruce straightened slightly, his chest tight. This was no longer about pulling her from a bench. It was about pulling her from the edge itself. The vet looked at the pup, then at Bruce. "We'll start treatment right away. She's on the line, but if we act fast, she has a chance." Bruce's jaw tightened. He nodded once, the weight of resolve steady in his eyes. The vet leaned over Molly, his stethoscope pressed to her ribs. His brow furrowed as he listened to the faint rhythm beneath her fragile chest. Severely dehydrated, he said, his voice clipped and certain. Exhausted. She's been pushed beyond her limit. A nurse hurried forward with supplies. The sound of wrappers tearing and instruments clinking filled the air. The room smelled sharply of alcohol wipes and antiseptic. Bruce's hand remained on Molly's paw, grounding himself in the fragile beat of her pulse. The vet gestured toward the IV line. We'll start fluids under the skin first. If she stabilizes, we can move to something stronger. He didn't waste words, but his eyes held a steady focus. The look of someone who had seen the line between life and loss too many times before. Bruce bent lower, his palm enveloping Molly's paw. Her toes twitched faintly under his touch, trembling as though even that small effort drained her. He whispered, "Stay with me, Molly." His voice cracked soft enough that only she could hear. The needle slid gently beneath her skin, and a small bubble formed, fluids seeping slowly into her body. Molly gave a weak whimper, a sound that carried both pain and endurance. Bruce closed his eyes, pressing his forehead close to her paw, as though lending her the strength she lacked. The boy shifted in the doorway, straining against Eliza's hand. His wide eyes followed every movement inside the room. "She's fighting," he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. Eliza's grip tightened on his shoulder, but her gaze never left the table. Her lips moved in silence, as if willing the puppy to hold on. Bruce felt the tremor of Molly's heartbeat against his palm, fast and shallow, each thump like a fragile drum struggling to keep rhythm. He had felt this before, when trapped victims clung to his hand in smoke-filled rooms, when every second mattered and each breath was a victory. The same urgency lived here in this small life pressed beneath his touch. Minutes stretched thin, heavy with waiting. The fluid line dripped steady, each drop falling like the measure of hope itself. Volunteers moved around him, voices low but purposeful. The vet checked her gums again, noting a faint improvement in color. His tone softened slightly. "She's responding. Slowly, but it's there." Bruce exhaled, a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. He looked down at Molly, her eyelids fluttering, her chest rising with steadier rhythm. She was still weak, still fragile, but the faint tether between them held. He tightened his grip on her paw, feeling the tremble lessen beneath his fingers. "That's it," he murmured. "Keep going, little one." The boy's toy slipped from his hand as he leaned closer, eyes shining. "She's stronger than she looks," he whispered, his words filled with simple conviction. Eliza bent to pick up the toy, her hand brushing her son's hair. When she straightened, her gaze met Bruce's across the small body on the table. For the first time, she allowed a flicker of hope to cross her face. Bruce nodded faintly, his jaw set. He knew the fight was far from over, but the spark in Molly's chest was enough to carry them forward. It was enough to remind him that even the smallest flame could light the dark. He held her paw tighter, the fragile beat beneath it, calling him back to memories long buried. The weight of the moment pressed heavy on his chest, stirring echoes of voices lost to fire. Bruce sat hunched at the table, his hand wrapped around Molly's paw, his thumb tracing slow circles against the rough patch where tape had torn her fur. The faint rise and fall of her chest steadied him, but it also stirred something old, something he had tried for years to bury. He closed his eyes, and the present bled into memory. Smoke thick as night filled his lungs again. Flames roared up stairwells, swallowing beams and windows in bursts of heat. His helmet felt heavy, his gloved hands slick with sweat as he pulled at a door swollen by fire. Behind it, a voice cried out, a woman desperate and sharp, a voice clawing for survival. He remembered breaking through the heat so strong it bent metal. He remembered reaching for her, his arms straining as the ceiling cracked. And then silence. The fire had taken her before his hands could. That silence had stayed with him, Every night, every quiet moment since it had pressed against him like ash that would not wash away. He had carried it into retirement, heavy as any scar. Now, sitting in the shelter with a trembling puppy beneath his hand, he felt that silence stir again. Only this time it was not the echo of failure. It was a warning. Molly's eyes opened briefly, glassy and tired. In them, Bruce saw the same plea he had seen in those burning rooms, a living being asking for one more chance. It was not loud, not desperate, but it was clear. "Help me." Bruce's chest tightened. He leaned closer, whispering words that came from a place deeper than thought. "I won't let you go. Not this time." The sound of the shelter pressed faintly around him. Dogs barking from distant kennels, the shuffle of volunteers, the hum of machines. But inside Bruce's head, it was still fire and ash, the weight of past lives. He thought of the faces he had not reached, the cries that had faded too soon. He thought of how helpless he had felt, in those moments swallowed by the chaos of flames. But here now, with Molly's paw in his palm, he was not helpless. He was not fighting walls of fire or collapsing ceilings. He was fighting for a single fragile heartbeat, and this was a battle he could stay with until the end. He opened his eyes, staring down at her. "You're a fighter," he murmured. "Stronger than you look. Stay with me, Molly. Stay." The boy's reflection in the glass door caught Bruce's attention. Small eyes wide, clutching his toy tight, the child mirrored the same hope Bruce felt trembling in his chest. Eliza stood behind him, her arms folded, her face drawn but steady, watching every breath the pup took. In that moment, Bruce understood he was not alone in this fight. The boy's quiet faith, Eliza's unspoken trust, they were standing with him. The weight he had carried alone for so long had shifted. Molly stirred faintly, her paw twitching in his grip. The fragile movement pushed through him like a spark catching on dry wood. He felt heat behind his eyes, but this time it was not the burn of smoke. It was the ache of hope rising where despair had lived for too long. He straightened his shoulders, his hand firm around hers. No more silence. No more regrets carved into memory. This was the moment to change the ending. Bruce bent close once more, his voice steady. "You've come this far. Keep fighting, girl. I'll be here." The room had settled into a tense rhythm, the steady drip of fluids, the quiet shuffle of staff, the hum of machines holding vigil. Bruce stayed bent close, his palms steady on Molly's paw. Her breath still rattled faintly, but there was something different in the air. A sense that the line she balanced on might tilt toward life. A nurse stepped forward with a small cup of water. She dipped her fingers in and brushed a drop across Molly's lips. For a moment, nothing happened. The pup lay still, her eyelids heavy, her chest rising slow. Then, with the slightest flicker, Molly's tongue darted out, tasting the droplet. Bruce drew in a sharp breath, his heart leaping. The tiny motion was almost invisible, yet it cracked through the tension like lightning. The boy gasped from the doorway, his voice breaking with joy. "She drank. She's alive, right? She's going to be okay." His words burst into the room, childlike and pure, filling the silence that had weighed so heavy. He clutched his toy against his chest, his small body trembling with hope. Bruce's throat tightened. He looked at the boy and managed a faint nod. "It's a start," he said, his voice low but steady. Eliza's hand moved to her son's shoulder, anchoring him. But she did not hush him this time. Instead, she stepped closer, her eyes drawn to the pup on the table. She had kept her distance before, wary and unsure, but now something softened in her expression. She watched Molly's tongue flick again, reaching for another droplet. The nurse obliged, tilting another bead of water against her mouth. Molly responded weakly, but surely the effort small, yet undeniable. Eliza's gaze shifted to Bruce. For the first time, there was no guarded hesitation, no doubt. Her voice was quiet, but it carried weight. "She trusts you." Bruce looked down at Molly, her paw twitching faintly beneath his hand. Trust. The word pressed into him like a promise he could not break. The boy leaned forward eagerly, his voice spilling over in excitement. "She's fighting, Mom. She's really fighting." Eliza smiled faintly, a rare break in her steady composure. "Yes," she whispered, brushing her son's hair back. "She is." Her eyes lifted again to Bruce, and this time there was belief in them. Bruce swallowed hard. The weight of the moment settled deeper in his chest, but it was no longer the crushing silence of memory. It was the fragile, trembling weight of hope. He had carried despair for so long that hope felt dangerous, as though it might vanish if he held it too tightly. But it was here undeniable, alive, in the twitch of Molly's paw and the sparkle in the boy's eyes. The nurse stepped back, adjusting the line of fluids. "She's not safe yet," she warned gently, "but she's responding." Bruce nodded, absorbing the words. He knew the road ahead would be steep, but for the first time he felt something stronger than fear. Resolve. He leaned close, whispering so only Molly could hear. "That's it, girl. Keep taking those steps. I'll be here for all of them." The boy's smile grew bright enough to cut through the sterile light of the room. Eliza's shoulders eased, her posture less guarded, as if she had finally allowed herself to stand on the side of hope. For a brief moment, the three of them, Bruce, Eliza, and the boy, stood bound by the fragile signs of life from a pup who refused to let go. Night draped itself over the shelter, muting the sounds of the city outside. The barking of dogs in the kennels had softened to tired whines and sighs. Volunteers moved slower now, their voices hushed, their footsteps echoing faintly down the halls. In the exam room, a dim lamp cast a small circle of light where Molly lay swaddled in a thin blanket. The steady drip of the fluid line marked time, each drop holding weight. Bruce sat hunched beside her, elbows on his knees, his hand resting gently on her paw. He hadn't moved for hours. Eliza and her son had found seats in the corner. The boy curled against his mother, his toy clutched to his chest. Their breathing had slowed with sleep, but Bruce could not close his eyes. He stared at Molly, every flicker of her ears, every twitch of her paw etched into him like firelight in the dark. Just after midnight, the fragile rhythm faltered. Molly's chest hitched, the rise and fall breaking into uneven gaps. Her eyelids fluttered once, then stilled. The monitor at her side let out a sharp, shrill tone. The line on the screen dipped, struggling to hold steady. Bruce's heart lurched. He pressed closer, both hands cupping her tiny paw. Now his voice shaking as he whispered, "Molly, stay with me. Don't give up." The machine's alarm quickened, a piercing cry that shattered the stillness of the night. Volunteers rushed back into the room, their faces taut with urgency. A nurse adjusted the line, another checked her pulse. The vet, drawn by the alarm, entered with sharp eyes and steady hands. "Her body's shutting down," he said quietly. His tone clipped but urgent. "She's slipping." Bruce bent low, his forehead nearly touching Molly's paw. He spoke through clenched teeth, steady and desperate. "Fight, girl. You've come too far to leave now. Hear me. You're not alone." The boy stirred awake at the sound of the alarm, his wide eyes filling with panic. "Mom, what's happening?" he asked, clutching at Eliza's sleeve. Eliza pulled him close, her face pale. She whispered, "She's struggling, though." The word felt fragile, almost breaking on her tongue. Bruce didn't look up. His focus was locked on Molly, his thumb rubbing small circles against her limp paw. Each beep of the monitor drove deeper into him, pulling memories of fire scenes where voices had fallen silent. He could not lose her too. Not this life, not this moment. "Breathe, Molly," he urged, his voice breaking. "Come back to me. Just one more breath. That's all you need. One more." The vet pressed at her chest with careful hands, urging her body back into rhythm. The room felt suspended air, heavy with the weight of waiting. Bruce whispered her name again and again, the sound a fragile tether. Molly. Molly. Stay. The monitor's tone spiked flat and merciless. For a second, it felt as though the room itself stopped breathing. Eliza tightened her arms around her son, burying his face in her shoulder, as if to shield him from the silence that pressed too close. Bruce closed his eyes, his hand gripping Molly's paw so tight his knuckles blanched. He could feel the stillness creeping in, could feel the edge of loss like fire against his chest. "No," he whispered. "Not you. Not tonight." The room hung on that edge, every second stretching into eternity. The room held its breath with her. The monitor blared its unbroken tone, each second sharper than the last. Bruce's chest tightened until he thought it might split. His hand clenched around Molly's paw, unwilling to let go, unwilling to accept the stillness pressing against them. Then against the silence, her small chest shuddered. It was faint, uneven, a ragged gasp dragged from the edge of nothing. Her body jolted with the effort, ribs rising, then falling hard. The monitor beeped once, jagged but alive. A sound so fragile yet so powerful, it tore through the weight, crushing the room. Bruce's eyes flew open. He bent low, whispering in disbelief. "That's it, girl. That's it." Another gasp followed, still weak but stronger than the first. Her heart stuttered, then caught a fragile rhythm, the monitor's blip returning slow and unsteady, but present. The vet exhaled sharply, tension leaving his shoulders. "She's back," he said, almost in awe. Eliza's arms loosened around her son. The boy peeked over her shoulder, his eyes wide and shining. "She's breathing again," he cried, his voice high with wonder. "She's alive." Bruce felt heat sting his eyes. Tears blurred his vision as he bent closer, his forehead nearly touching Molly's. He whispered, steady this time, "Good girl. You're stronger than the dark." Her paw twitched faintly against his palm, the smallest motion, but enough to confirm she was still fighting. The boy wriggled free from Eliza's hold, stepping closer to the table. He pressed his small hands against the edge, leaning forward to see. "She heard you," he said with certainty. "She came back because you called her." Bruce's throat tightened, words stuck in his chest. He could only nod, brushing his thumb gently across Molly's paw. The warmth beneath his skin was faint, fragile, but it was there. Eliza stepped closer too, her voice low, steady, almost reverent. "I thought we'd lost her." Her eyes glistened, her usual composure breaking as she watched the pup's chest rise and fall again. Bruce glanced up at her, then back to Molly. "Not tonight," he said firmly, though his own voice trembled. The room shifted then. The fear that had smothered them thinned, replaced by something fragile but undeniable: hope. It hung in the air, delicate as glass, yet strong enough to hold them all upright. The vet adjusted the IV line, his movements calmer now. "She's still in danger, but this is the fight in her. She chose to come back." Bruce stroked Molly's head with a trembling hand. He had seen lives fade before his eyes watched flames swallow voices that never returned. Tonight, in this small pup's gasp for air, he felt the opposite: the miracle of return. Tears broke loose, sliding down his face, unchecked and unashamed. They fell onto the towel beneath Molly, vanishing into the fabric like the proof of everything he had carried too long. The boy smiled through his own tears, clutching his toy to his chest. "She's brave," he whispered, voice filled with awe. Eliza reached for her son's hand, holding it tight, her gaze steady on Bruce. "You kept her here," she said quietly. "She trusts you enough to stay." Bruce shook his head, his eyes still on the pup. "She did this. She chose to breathe. But deep down he knew the bond between them. The quiet vow whispered over and over had played its part. The monitor's beeps steadied into a fragile rhythm, each sound more precious than any silence. Bruce exhaled his chest, loosening for the first time that night. The battle was not over, but they had won back a heartbeat. The room dimmed as the night deepened. Outside, the city had quieted to the hum of traffic in the distance, but inside the shelter, time held still. The soft beep of the monitor filled the silence, steady but fragile, as though reminding them with every sound how close they had come to losing her. Bruce remained by the table, his hand never leaving Molly's paw. His shoulders slumped with exhaustion, yet he refused to rest. The boy sat curled in a chair nearby, his toy pressed to his chest, his small eyes fighting sleep. Eliza sat beside him, her posture straight, though weariness etched her face. They had all been drawn into this vigil, bound by the life of a pup who had demanded their presence. The boy's voice broke the silence. "She's breathing better now," he whispered, leaning forward as though speaking too loud might disturb Molly. Bruce gave a faint nod, his voice low. "She is. She's fighting through." The boy looked up at him, hesitant. "You were a firefighter, right?" Bruce's jaw tightened. Memories flickered in the dim light flames and smoke pressing against his mind. He nodded slowly. "I was. For a long time." The boy tilted his head. "Did you save people?" Bruce hesitated. His eyes stayed on Molly, her chest rising in fragile rhythm. "Sometimes," he said softly, "but not always." Eliza glanced at him, her expression shifting. She seemed to understand more in that answer than the words gave away. For a moment she wanted to speak, but her son's small hand tugged her sleeve, drawing her back to quiet. Bruce sighed, the weight of old fire scenes pressing against his chest. "I've carried the ones I couldn't save with me every day. Tonight feels different. Tonight I can stay and see the fight through." The boy's gaze dropped to Molly. "She's like you," he said. "She didn't give up." Bruce blinked at the words, caught off guard. A long pause followed before he answered. "Maybe she's teaching me how not to give up." Eliza shifted in her chair, her voice calm but steady. "We've all lost something." She smoothed her son's hair, her hand lingering there as if to protect him from what life had already taken. "His father left when he was little. I've been holding everything together since. I thought I had to be strong enough for both of us." Her eyes found Molly, then Bruce. But strength isn't always about standing alone. Sometimes it's about letting others stand with you. The boy leaned into her side, his toy squished between them. His eyes were glassy, heavy with sleep, but he fought to keep them open. "I want to see her wake up," he murmured. Bruce's voice softened. "You will. Dawn has a way of bringing strength with it." The hours crept slowly. Volunteers checked in, offering quiet reassurances, but the three of them stayed in place, bound by silent resolve. Bruce's head dipped once or twice, his body heavy with fatigue. But each time Molly twitched or shifted, he was alert again. Eliza's eyes closed briefly, but her son's small fingers wrapped around her hand, pulled her back. They endured the night together, each carrying scars of their own, but in that room, those scars no longer felt as sharp. Near dawn, the first hint of light touched the narrow window. The monitor continued its fragile song, steadier now than hours before. Bruce exhaled slowly, his hand brushing gently across Molly's head. "She's holding on," he whispered. The boy stirred, his small voice breaking through the quiet. "Maybe she'll stand up when the sun comes." Eliza pressed a kiss to his hair, her eyes shining. "Maybe she will." The night broke, slowly, pale light seeping through the narrow window of the shelter. It painted soft streaks across the room, washing the metal table and thin blanket in gentle gold. The harsh edges of fear seemed to soften in that glow. And for the first time in hours, the air carried more than tension. It carried possibility. Bruce straightened his back stiff from hours hunched forward. His hand still rested over Molly's paw. The monitor ticked steady, its rhythm no longer jagged, but fragile and sure. He let out a slow breath, his chest easing with each blip. Then, as the sun's warmth touched the edge of the table, Molly's eyelids fluttered. Bruce leaned closer, hardly daring to move. Her lashes trembled, then lifted, revealing eyes glazed with exhaustion, yet glinting faintly with life. For a heartbeat, he wondered if he had imagined it. But then her gaze shifted, searching, finding him. "Molly," he whispered, his voice breaking into a smile. Her ears twitched, small and uneven, but enough to tell him she had heard. She tried to lift her head, wobbling, then sagged back. Bruce slipped his arm beneath her, steadying her with care. Eliza stirred awake beside her son, her hand flying to her mouth as she realized what was happening. "She's awake," she whispered, tears rushing into her eyes. The boy was quicker. He scrambled off the chair, his toy tumbling to the floor as he pressed against the table's edge. "She's looking at us," he cried, his voice bubbling with laughter and relief. Molly shifted again, her tiny paws pressing weakly against the blanket. She wobbled once more, legs trembling under her. Bruce held his breath as she pushed harder, her chest rising with effort. "Easy, girl," he murmured. "Take your time." With a final push, Molly lifted herself to a shaky stand. Her legs quivered, her frame swaying, but she was upright. Eliza's tears spilled freely down her cheeks. She pressed her hand against her son's shoulder, as though grounding herself, her other hand covering her lips. A sob escaped her, raw but full of joy. The boy clapped his hands, his grin wide and radiant. "She's standing. She's really standing." He turned to his mother, laughter tangled with tears. "She's going to be okay." "Mom?" Molly wobbled, nearly toppling, but Bruce steadied her with his hands. Her paws pressed into the blanket again, firmer this time, as though each breath gave her new strength. Bruce swallowed hard, his vision blurring. He had seen survivors walk out of fire before, but never had he felt the miracle so close, so personal. "That's it, Molly," he whispered. "You're stronger than the night." Eliza wiped her cheeks, her voice trembling. "I thought I'd lost faith in second chances," she said quietly. "But she's proving me wrong." The boy reached out his small hand, brushing gently against Molly's back. She flicked her ears at his touch, then leaned ever so slightly into him. Bruce watched his chest tightening with something he hadn't felt in years. A deep, unshakable belief that broken things could heal, that endings could turn into beginnings. The monitor continued its soft, steady song as Molly stood there trembling, yet defiant, framed by the morning light. For the first time since he had seen her taped to that cruel bench, Bruce felt certainty. She was not fading. She was stepping into life. The morning sun stretched over the shelter, spilling warmth across the small patch of grass outside. Dew clung to the blades, glittering under the light like scattered glass. For the first time since the night's ordeal, the air felt calm, touched with promise. Bruce carried Molly carefully through the doors, her body wrapped in a clean towel. She shifted slightly in his arms, her head pressing weakly against his chest. The monitor's steady rhythm had been replaced by the steady beat of her fragile breaths, and each one reassured him she was ready for more. Eliza and her son followed close, too, the boy nearly bouncing with anticipation. "Can we put her down, Mom? Just for a little bit," he asked, his voice bright with hope. Bruce glanced at Eliza. She nodded, though worry lingered in her eyes. Together they stepped onto the grass. Bruce knelt, lowering Molly slowly until her paws touched the cool ground. At first she wavered. Her legs trembled under her, the earth strange after so long pressed against steel and blankets. She sniffed at the damp grass, her nose twitching as though discovering the world all over again. The boy crouched a few feet away, patting the ground eagerly. "Come here, Molly. You can do it." His small hands clapped together, his face glowing with anticipation. Bruce steadied her chest with his hands, murmuring encouragement. "One step at a time, girl. The world's waiting." Molly wobbled forward. One paw lifted shaky and uncertain, but it found the grass. Then another. Her movements were clumsy, her frame fragile, but she moved. Each step seemed to carry more than her tiny weight. It carried the weight of survival itself. The boy laughed, his voice ringing across the morning air. "She's walking to me, Mom. She's really walking." Eliza pressed her hand to her mouth, her eyes shimmering as she watched. "Yes," she whispered. "She is." Molly stumbled halfway, her legs nearly folding beneath her. Bruce started forward, ready to catch her, but she steadied herself, pressing on with stubborn determination. Her ears twitched at the boy's voice, her gaze fixed on him, as though pulled by an invisible thread. Step by step, she crossed the small stretch of grass until she reached him. The boy opened his arms, and Molly collapsed gently into them, her body weak, but her tail giving the faintest wag. The child's laughter burst bright, mingled with tears he didn't try to hide. He hugged her close, his toy forgotten in the grass. "She chose me," he whispered, awe filling every syllable. Bruce stood back, his chest aching in a way that felt both painful and healing. He had seen rescues before, but never like this. Never where the choice belonged to the one being saved. Eliza knelt beside her son, stroking Molly's ears softly. The pup leaned into the touch, her breathing uneven, but steady, her eyes closing briefly as if savoring the warmth of belonging. For a moment, time stilled, the boy cradling her Eliza's hand, resting gently, Bruce watching with quiet reverence. It was as if the morning had drawn a circle around them, marking the bond forged through fear and survival. Bruce inhaled, his eyes fixed on Molly. She had been abandoned, bound to a bench, as if her life held no worth. Yet here she was walking, choosing to step into the arms of a child who called her name. And in that choice, she had stitched the three of them together in a way no words could. The morning light lingered across the patch of grass, turning each dewdrop into a spark. The boy still held Molly against his chest, his small arms wrapped around her fragile frame, as if letting go might break the spell. Eliza's hand rested gently on the pup's back, her touch steady, her eyes soft with something Bruce had not seen in them before. Bruce stood a step away. His breath caught in his chest. He felt relief that Molly was safe, but also the heaviness of knowing the fight was not yet over. Survival was only the beginning. What came next mattered just as much. Eliza glanced up at him, her hand never leaving Molly's fur. "Bruce," she said quietly, "we'd like to keep her." The words hung in the air, simple yet powerful. Bruce blinked, uncertain. He'd heard her right. "Keep her," he echoed. Eliza nodded, her expression firm but tender. "Yes. She's already ours in a way. You saw how she chose him." She looked down at her son, who was now whispering Molly's name, as if it were the most important word in the world. "And I think she chose us too." Bruce's throat tightened. The image of Molly taped to the bench flashed in his mind, her eyes pleading for anyone to care. He had carried her from that moment into the shelter, through the long night, through the fight for every fragile breath. The idea of letting her go stirred something raw in him. He stepped closer, his voice low. "Eliza, she's been through so much. She needs more than love. She needs stability, care, patience. It's not easy." "I know," Eliza said softly. Her gaze didn't waver. "I've been holding this boy together since his father left. It hasn't been easy, but it's made me stronger. And maybe—" She brushed her fingers over Molly's ear. "Maybe she'll make us stronger too." The boy looked up, then his eyes bright and pleading. "Please, Bruce. She belongs with us. I'll take care of her, I promise." Bruce felt his chest twist. He had heard promises before, thin words that faltered when life grew heavy. But the boy's tone was different, unpolished, sincere, woven from the kind of truth only a child could carry. He knelt beside them, his hand reaching out to steady Molly where she leaned. Her eyes fluttered open briefly, finding his face. For a moment, it was as if she were waiting for his answer too. Bruce exhaled slowly, the weight of the night pressing through him. He thought of the lives he had lost in flames of the silence that had haunted him. Molly had brought him into the fight again, had pulled him back to purpose. But she didn't just need a rescuer. She needed a home. He looked at Eliza, then at the boy, and finally back to Molly. His voice was rough but certain. "You're right. She deserves more than what I can give alone. She deserves a family. If you're ready for that, she's yours." Eliza's eyes shimmered, her lips parting as if to thank him, but no words coming. The boy let out a cheer, hugging Molly tighter. "Did you hear that, Molly? You're coming home with us?" Bruce smiled faintly, though his heart ached with both loss and relief. He reached out, brushing Molly's head once more. "She's got her second chance," he whispered. The shelter doors opened behind them, a volunteer stepping out with papers in hand. "If you're ready," she said gently, "we can start the adoption process." Eliza rose to her feet, her son clutching Molly close. She nodded, her voice steady. "We're ready." Inside the shelter's small office, the clamor of barking faded to a muffled backdrop. The room smelled faintly of paper and disinfectant, a place where decisions were sealed in ink. Bruce stood just inside the doorway, arms crossed loosely while Eliza settled at the desk. Her son sat beside her, Molly curled in his lap, her body still weak but her eyes half open, blinking as if the world finally belonged to her again. The volunteer spread the forms across the desk, her tone gentle but professional. "This won't take long. Once everything's signed, Molly will officially be yours." Eliza nodded, her hand steady as she picked up the pen. The boy leaned forward eagerly, his cheek pressed against Molly's fur. "Hear that?" he whispered to her. "You're ours. Forever." Bruce watched, his chest heavy. He remembered pulling Molly from the tape that had bound her, how she had sagged against him like a rag doll. Now, only hours later, she was claimed chosen, held in the arms of a child who looked at her as though she were treasure. The pen scratched softly against the paper. Eliza signed her name, her expression firm, her eyes glistening as though she felt the weight of the moment. The volunteer looked up at her. "Congratulations. She's your dog now." The boy let out a cheer that bounced off the walls, his laughter bright and free. He lifted Molly gently, though she was too weak to wriggle, and pressed his nose against hers. "We're a family now, Molly," he said, his voice filled with awe. Molly's ears flicked faintly, her gaze settling on him. Her tail moved, the smallest wag but real. Eliza placed her hand over her son's shoulder, her voice breaking with quiet joy. "We're a family," she repeated. "All of us." Bruce turned away for a moment, his throat tightening. He felt pride, relief, and a sharp ache that he hadn't expected. In saving her, he had reopened something inside himself. A reminder of what it meant to care, to fight, to let go. The volunteer tucked the papers into a folder and smiled warmly. "She'll need rest, food, and time, but she's strong. She's already proven that." Eliza nodded. "She'll get all of that, and more." The boy stroked Molly's ears, whispering promises in a stream of soft words. How he would play with her, feed her, never leave her behind. His small hands cradled her with a care far beyond his years. Bruce stepped closer, then resting a hand lightly on the back of the boy's chair. His voice was low but steady. "You're giving her more than a home. You're giving her a reason to keep fighting." The boy looked up, his smile wide. "She gave us a reason too." Those words lingered in the air, simple but true. Bruce felt them settle into him, softening the edges of the grief he had carried for so long. The morning light spilled through the window, catching in Eliza's hair and casting a glow over Molly's fragile frame. For the first time since that cruel bench, the pup looked as though she belonged. Not to fear, not to fate, but to family. Eliza gathered the folder of papers, her son clutching Molly close. She turned to Bruce, her voice filled with quiet gratitude. "Thank you for bringing her this far. We'll carry her the rest of the way." Bruce nodded, his eyes fixed on Molly. She was worth every step. The office grew quiet once the papers were tucked away. The hum of the shelter softened behind closed doors, leaving only the three of them, with Molly pressed safe in the boy's arms. Sunlight streamed through the window, dust motes drifting like faint sparks. Bruce stood still for a moment, watching. He had carried her from despair into survival, and now she was cradled in the warmth of belonging. Relief filled him, but it came braided with something harder. A tug deep in his chest, a reminder that letting go carried its own weight. The boy turned, holding Molly up just enough for Bruce to see her face. "She's ours now," he said proudly, his voice brimming with wonder. Bruce stepped closer. His hand reached out slow and steady until his fingers brushed the top of Molly's head. Her fur was softer now that the tape and dust were gone, her small body still weak but no longer trembling with fear. She blinked at him, her eyes heavy but calm, and leaned faintly into his touch. Bruce bent lower, his hand resting gently on her crown. His voice was quiet, almost a breath. "You've got a home now, little one. A family. You'll never be alone again." The words came out as both promise and release. Molly gave a soft exhale, almost a sigh, and her tail stirred faintly against the boy's arm. Bruce felt the warmth of that small response and closed his eyes for a heartbeat, letting the moment settle. When he opened them, Eliza was watching. Her eyes shone, but not only with gratitude. There was recognition there, too. She seemed to understand what this farewell cost him and how much it healed him at the same time. "You saved her," she said softly. "And maybe you saved us too." Bruce shook his head, his lips pressing into a faint smile. "She saved herself. I just made sure she had the chance." Still, he felt something shifting inside him, a release of years of silence and loss. He had carried memories of lives he couldn't reach, voices he couldn't save. But now, in this small pup's survival, he felt one of those old wounds close-stitched by compassion rather than regret. The boy leaned his cheek against Molly's head. "We'll take care of her. I promise," he said again, his tone steady now, not just childish enthusiasm, but something that sounded like truth. Bruce nodded, his heart tightening and loosening all at once. He believed him. He withdrew his hand slowly from Molly's head, letting his touch linger for one last moment before falling to his side. The boy turned away, already murmuring to her about the games they would play, the walks they would take. Eliza shifted the folder under her arm and moved toward the door. Bruce followed them, out into the sunlight. The day had fully broken now, warm and alive, the air carrying the scents of grass and the hum of traffic. At the curb, Eliza paused and looked back at him. "We'll send you updates, if you'd like." Bruce gave a slow nod, his smile quiet. That would mean a lot. The boy climbed into the car, still holding Molly as though she were a treasure he could never let slip away. Eliza settled behind the wheel. Bruce leaned down once more, meeting Molly's eyes through the open window. "You've got your place now," he whispered. "Live it well." Her ears twitched, and though she said nothing, the trust in her gaze felt like an answer. As the car pulled away, Bruce stood on the sidewalk, his hand resting against his chest. He felt both sorrow and peace, as though a part of his past had been laid to rest in exchange for a future he could believe in. The park was alive with the music of children's laughter, the rustle of leaves and the rhythm of footsteps pounding along winding paths. Sunlight filtered through the trees, laying warm patches on the grass where families gathered. Among them, a boy with bright eyes ran across the open field, his voice carrying in bursts of joy. "Molly." "Over here," he called. The small pup bounded after him, her legs still unsteady but full of determination. Each leap was clumsy, her paws tangling as she pushed forward, but her tail wagged wildly with each step. The weakness that once pressed her down had given way to playful energy. She stumbled, rolled into the grass, then scrambled back to her feet, her ears flicking as the boy laughed and clapped. Eliza stood nearby, her smile soft, her gaze following both child and dog with a gentleness that came from knowing how close she had come to losing this moment. The boy dropped to his knees, opening his arms wide. Molly barreled toward him, collapsing into his embrace, licking his cheek as his laughter rang out bright and unrestrained. Not far away, Bruce watched. He stood by the park's edge, half hidden beneath a tree, his hands tucked into his jacket pockets. His eyes followed every bounding step, every wag of Molly's tail, every burst of laughter from the boy. He felt the air loosen in his chest, a quiet satisfaction spreading through him. This was what he had fought for. Not only the fragile breaths in the shelter, not only the trembling steps on the grass outside, but this. A pup running free, a boy's arms wide with welcome, a family held together by love. For a long moment, Bruce simply stood there, letting the scene wash over him. The weight of his past, of fire, of loss, of silence, felt lighter in this place. He had not only carried Molly into survival, he had carried himself into something close to healing. Molly turned suddenly as though sensing him. Her ears perked, her gaze lifting to the tree where he stood. For a heartbeat, her tail wagged faster, and Bruce swore she remembered. He lifted a hand in a small wave, his smile quiet but certain. The boy followed her gaze, squinting until he saw Bruce. His grin widened and he waved too, calling out, "She's running, Bruce. She's really running." Bruce's throat tightened. He lifted his hand higher, giving a nod, his voice carrying just enough. "She's where she belongs." Eliza caught his eye from across the grass. She didn't wave, but she didn't need to. Her nod, firm and steady, was enough to tell him she understood. That gratitude ran deeper than words, and trust had settled between them like a foundation. Bruce lingered a while longer, watching Molly chase the boy through the sunlight. The sight filled him with a quiet joy, the kind that came not from holding on, but from letting go and seeing life flourish anyway. He turned his gaze to the sky, the words rising inside him, unbidden as though spoken by the memory of every life he had once tried to save. Cruelty is loud, but compassion can be louder. The truth of it settled into him, steady as breath. One choice, one step, one act of care had shifted the course of a life, perhaps more than one. And in that, he found peace. As he walked away from the park, Bruce carried no weight of regret. Only the echo of laughter, the sight of a pup running free, and the knowledge that compassion had spoken louder than cruelty. Molly's journey is more than the story of a rescued puppy. It is a reminder of how a single moment of compassion can shift the course of a life. Left abandoned and bound, she might have been forgotten like so many others. But because someone chose to stop to care and to fight for her, she was given not only survival, but the gift of belonging. German Shepherds are known for their loyalty, intelligence, and courage. Molly showed us that even in her smallest and weakest state, those qualities lived within her. Her trembling steps toward the boy in the park were not just the first steps of recovery. They were a declaration of trust, proof that love has the power to heal. Bruce, Eliza, and her son each carried their own scars. Yet through Molly they found connection, strength, and renewal. This is what animals so often bring into our lives, the ability to remind us of our humanity, to call us back to tenderness when the world feels harsh. The message is clear. Compassion is louder than cruelty. In a time when indifference can feel overwhelming, every act of kindness matters. Choosing to rescue, to adopt, to extend care is not only about saving an animal. It is about saving the parts of ourselves that risk growing silent in the face of suffering. Let Molly's story inspire us to love deeper, to stand for those who cannot speak, and to cherish the loyalty and unconditional love our animal companions bring. Because when we choose compassion, we do more than save a life. We create a brighter, gentler world for all.